Now it's time for our legal expert to weigh in on testimony from day 6 of this trial, criminal defense attorney Karen Nance. Karen, thank you so much for coming on tonight. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get to everything that happened in court today, got to ask you a question. I want to first start with the state's last witness, Daunte Wright's father, Aubrey Wright. He gave emotional testimony. He talked about the love he had for his son. Let's take a listen and I'll get you to weigh in.
And he loved his son.
And do you love your son, Daunte, a lot as well?
A lot. I love Daunte. He was loved.
Do you miss him?
I miss him a lot, every day.
The prosecution started their case in chief by calling on a number of witnesses like Daunte's mother and girlfriend who gave moving testimony. You don't really see that often from the state. Your thoughts on their approach so far?
I think that it's very effective. I think especially when we've heard the third witness that basically knows him intimately. You had the mother, the girlfriend, and now the father. And they characterized his testimony as spark of life, which means that he brings humanization to his son. So we already seen body cam footage and other footage of Miss Potter and her being emotional, but it's really important for the jury to see that she's still alive, she's still here. We have the death of a 20-year-old who had a small child, the grandchild of the father who just testified. So it's important to humanize him and his family so that we can see that the loss of life is something that we can't get back. Kim Parter's here, she's here raising her kids, and that's what's been deprived of the Wright family.
All right, let's talk about court today that started with cross-examination of Sergeant Mike Peterson. It was his second day on the stand. The prosecution questioned him yesterday, but today he testified that there have been several instances of officers confusing tasers with guns. Take a listen.
There can be a confusion between a taser and a handgun.
Yes.
And there is a recognition thus by the company that makes these things that there can indeed be a confusion between the two.
Yes.
Otherwise, why warn you, right?
Right.
And there have been confusions between tasers and guns.
Several.
Across the country.
Yes.
And in fact, the taser is shaped, at least on a handle basis, like a gun, right?
It is.
It has a trigger, right?
Yes.
The handle may be smaller.
Yes.
It's still a gun handle.
To fit into a hand, correct.
So, Karen, it seems like the state witnesses, once they get on cross-examination, tend to agree with what their assertions are. What did you make of Peterson saying, yeah, I mean, there have been a number of mistakes made by other officers. However, he wasn't aware of any of those mistakes happening within that department except for Potter.
Well, I think what happened with Sergeant Peterson's testimony, I agree on cross-examination. The defense did a good job of trying to refute what he had said on direct. But then we had testimony from Mr. Sutton, who was a former police officer. He had excellent credentials. He was a professor at a law school, and now he's a reasonable use of force expert, and he also testified in the Chauvin trial. So I think that he actually did a very good job of describing the tasers. Tasers didn't start coming into use in the police departments until 1993. Kim Potter got on 1995. So I think that it's important what he said. Basically, it substantiates what Sergeant Peterson said, and that in this particular case, it was not reasonable even to use a taser, let alone a gun, with this stop with Daunte Wright.
And it's important to note that on redirect, the state asked Peterson, who was a former officer as well, if he had ever drawn his handgun when he meant to draw his taser, and he says no. All right, Karen, the next witness, for the state was Professor Seth Stoughton. He's a use of force expert who also happened to testify during the Derek Chauvin trial. Now, Stoughton said, who's also a former police officer, has said that he has served as an expert witness in at least 80 different trials. And during his testimony today, he said that Potter's use of deadly force wasn't justified. Take a listen to that.
In this case, have you reached an opinion to a reasonable degree of professional certainty whether Officer Potter's conduct in using deadly force was reasonable and justified?
I have, yes.
And what is that opinion?
The use of deadly force was not appropriate, and the evidence suggests that a reasonable officer in Officer Potter's position could not have believed that it was proportional to the threat at the time. In other words, the use of force was apparently excessive and inappropriate.
So, Karen, the defense is trying to make this argument that Potter was justified in using deadly force, even though she was trying to use a taser, that even if she had tried to use a gun, that would have been justified because her partner was hanging from the car while it was moving and could have been killed or seriously injured. This expert is saying on the stand that no, it actually wasn't appropriate because the officer leaning into the passenger side of a car, yes, it constituted a risk, but not an imminent threat. Your thoughts?
I think that was a really good point that he brought out, and I thought he described it very, very reasonably and understandable for the jury. He talked about the taser and the distance that Officer Potter was from Daunte Wright, and the fact that even using a taser at that close distance would not have had the effect that she wanted to have, and in fact created a risk of harm to the other officers that were there, as well as to the passenger, the girlfriend in the car. And he went on to say that when you tase someone at that close distance, which is not advisable, situation where what happened in this case, which is the car ended up accelerating, even if he had used the taser, she had actually used the taser instead of the gun, it would have not had the effect that it should have because of the close distance, and caused a problem, a deadly problem or a potentially deadly problem, in that it could have hurt other individuals, and it did in this particular case. So I thought that was really an effective argument. In addition, he did say that in his experience, there had only been 20 cases that he was aware of that we had this weapons confusion, that someone used a taser instead of a gun. So I thought that it was a very effective and persuasive argument for the jury.
Karen, Stoughton also testified that Potter's comments after the shooting, especially when she said that she was going to go to prison, that indicated that she was aware that her use of deadly force was unjustified. How bad or how damning are her own words in this video? And is that maybe partly the reason why she's taking the stand in her own defense, is to clarify some of those comments?
I think that he's actually very well on point. We had the testimony that she had, as well as other officers that used tasers, they had training. You had to be certified to use the taser, and she had the training not too far before this incident happened. I believe it was within the last 6 months. So we have a situation where you were trained as an officer to use a taser. You used it on the non-dominant, or you kept it on the non-dominant side. So there's a lot of inconsistencies in her testimony, and it appears, once we have this information, this testimony from this witness, that she was basically trying to cover her steps and make statements that would not absolve, or hopefully absolve her from doing some prison time, because she knew that she wasn't acting in accordance with the rules and regulations, that she had been certified and signed off, that she was aware that this is not the use of the taser. And it seemed to me overly dramatic, actually. And I think that the team were trying to support her in this, in trying to help her be absolved of this crime. And it is a crime that she committed in this instance.
Well, we're definitely getting close to the end of the prosecution state case in chief, and closer to that moment where Kim Potter will be taking the stand in her own defense. Attorney Karen Nance, thank you so much for your insight.